Hello, and welcome to a podcast about the Brony fandom and aspects of feminism within it. This is for the International Day of the Woman. The theme of this year's International Women's Day is inspiring change. While the My Little Pony fandom likes to think of itself as a progressive social movement, I think it's fair to say that it's failed to champion the feminist messages of the show by making it more about the fans themselves, particularly the male fans. Um, and with little to no impact on the behavior of the overall fandom compared to the rest of geekdom at large. That contrast and the question of inspiring change within the fandom and elsewhere could possibly be one of the core driving themes of this effort. So, to begin with, we have a panel, including myself. My name is Sonya. I go by Sonya Lynn. I am the con chair of BABSCon, the Bay Area Brony Spectacular. I am also a trans woman. I am a lesbian, and I've been active in feminist and queer causes for over 20 years. Next up,
I'm
I'd like to introduce Factory to you. Factory, go ahead and introduce yourself.
activism in general.
Our
Hello.
next panelist is Lilli. Lilli, could you introduce yourself to the listeners?
Hello, I'm Lilli. I have no fandom credentials whatsoever. I'm just active in feminism. I've basically been participating in feminist and queer groups since college, similar to Factory. But I'm also probably younger than most of the people here, so.
And finally, we have TechFec. TechFec,
Hello.
please introduce yourself.
I'm Christina. I go by TechFec. I'm an editor over at Derby News Network. I have a few of my own sites, one of them being TRS Feminists, which sort of looks at feminism and futurism together. So I have a decent hold in the pony fandom, at least on the news media side, and I'm trying to do more feminist things with writing and trying to do things with that.
Thanks, every pony. So let's get started. Our first topic today is to sort of give a brief history of My Little Pony Friendship is Magic and the feminist messages that Lauren Faust originally intended for the show to embody. She's been on record as saying a number of things, one of which being that in the characters of the show, she tries to show that there's no one way of being a girl or a woman. And let's start with that. What does everyone have to say?
So, go ahead.
Yeah, well, at least with the animation, we know they use flash puppets, so they sort of limit the body types of the characters. I know there's a lot of people that are upset that there's not thinner characters, fatter characters. They're all essentially the same size, and everyone in Pony Society is the same size, but it's more of inwardness of being a woman than outwardness. You have Twilight Sparkle, who's smart and focuses on books. You have Rarity, who focuses on fashion and romance, and then Applejack does physical labor. Rainbow Dash does sports. It's sort of like the 1980s My Little Pony Tales with the sort of ideas of what a girl or a woman can be, only it's updated with the, 20 teens, what you can be a girl, because you can be smart, you can be sporty, you can, do hard work all day, but at the end of the day, you're still a girl because you say, hey, I'm a girl.
Actually, I'd like to comment a little bit on the characterization of Rarity as a fashionista. That character had a lot of possibility to be a very bad stereotype. And I think that by having her be not just a fashionista, but a dressmaker, a creative, an artist, that actually added a lot of depth to a character that could otherwise have been very two-dimensional. And it's a big reason why, over time, Rarity has become one of the favorite ponies among the main six out in the fandom. It subverts the usual trend to basically, give us the whole, like remember the old Barbies with the talking chips, let's go shopping. Math is tough.
And then they make Pink Celestia the toy. Brush my hair. I want to fly to the castle.
In her defense, her wings are very pretty.
Well, although that's not something that Lauren herself had anything to do with. That's Hasbro, and that's a whole nother can of worms.
Unfortunately, My Little Pony toys have not been particularly progressive whenever it comes to the actual toy line itself, but the messages in the show and the characterization that they do is, for the most part, actually really good. The like you were talking about before with people's ability to be a girl the way they want to be, media representation is really important for young people because even across like cultures, like people, if they don't have kind of this like, if they don't see themselves in media, they don't think they can be like that. There's a lot of information out there regarding like the effect on young kids that media figures have media figures have on them, and just being able to point to shows like this to say, yes, we do have characters that are not just all, I guess, bubbly-headed bimbos or just one-dimensional women embracing femininity, but rather just the recognition that, yes, you can be a woman regardless of what you're like. You don't have to be this.
And I'd also add that the flawed nature of the characters adds a lot to that, because it shows that you also don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be a paragon. Like any normal person, you have your flaws, but you work to overcome them, much like the characters. And you look at a character like Fluttershy, who, again, could have been a terrible stereotype of the shrinking Violet character, but she possesses an inner strength that allows her to overcome that, and in some respects can be the most commanding pony of the main six at times.
That's basic good storytelling as well. A lot of storytelling revolves around having good and realistic characters. And My Little Pony does very well, especially for a children's show, at providing that. A complex character gives you complex reasons to feel insecure, complex places to go with that character.
And the characters do show that evolution. I've heard charges leveled against the show as the seasons have progressed that they don't evolve, and I've not found that to be the case. Yes, the characters do struggle with those same flaws over time, but I think you see an evolution in how they handle those flaws and how intensely those flaws, how intensely those flaws impact their lives. A great example would be the recent episode, It's Not Easy Being Breezy's, when while Fluttershy initially lets herself get, walked all over a little bit, she finds it within herself to then assert herself and say, okay, guys, you need to go. But without also overreacting the way she would have in, say, putting your hoof down.
It also doesn't take her very long to find some assertiveness. In the first scene, when the Breezies are first blown away by the leaf, she jumps right into action in front of everybody without a second thought to save them. And I'm not sure that Fluttershy in Season 1 could have done that.
I'm also not sure that Fluttershy in Season 1 could have finally, at the end of Philly Vanilli, found the ability to get up in front of even just an audience of her friends to sing with the Ponytones.
The characters are making gradual changes over time, which if they were making, large character changes, Fluttershy would have just gone on stage and sang right away to help her friends. But because she's still not 100% grown up, her character cycle growth hasn't finished, it's still taking her, a good chunk of the episode to figure out, hey, I can do this. And that's why at the end she's able to do it without issue. So, probably when MLP ends years and years from now, when the Cutie Mark Crusaders figure out who they are and everyone figures out who they are, there should be a nice happy ending where they all grow past whatever character flaws they have and, I guess, be done. Or Hasbro can just keep going at it forever.
One thing we haven't really touched on is the controversy about the characterization of Rainbow Dash, particularly within the fandom. because of her coloration and her tomboyish nature, one of the common fanon interpretations of Rainbow Dash is that she's a lesbian. Now, as a lesbian, I don't have a problem with that. I'm perfectly happy to welcome Rainbow Dash into our fold, but when Lauren herself came out and said, now wait a minute here, that's a stereotype, you're being unfair and denigrating to both, and of course I'm paraphrasing here, to both lesbian tomboys and straight tomboys. I found that to be a fascinating and empowering message that that stereotype hurts both, and to say nothing of bi women as well, hurts everyone at any point in the sexuality spectrum.
Like, her name is Rainbow Dash, which is from a G3 toy character named Rainbow Dash, and as
Who
everybody
always
knows,
dresses in style.
yeah, who always dresses in style. And so G3 Rainbow Dash had nothing to do with dashing. She had a rainbow mane and tail, and she just dressed up all day. And so she was a much shallower version of Rarity's character. And since Hasbro could very easily use that trademark with their new toys, that's why they went with it. And Rainbow Dash was originally Firefly from the G1 sets. And Firefly was a pink pony with the dark blue mane and tail, and she was adventurous. She would jump headfirst into things. She didn't put her personal safety above everything, but she wanted to help her friends, and she was very important in the first movie. And that's who Rainbow Dash's character is based off of. So a brave character like Katniss Everdeen, which is sort of what Firefly is like, nobody looks at Katniss and says she's a lesbian. They look at Katniss and say she's a strong woman. But if you slap a rainbow on Rainbow Dash, then Rainbow Dash is magically turned into a lesbian, because if you have a rainbow, you gotta be gay, apparently.
Well, not just a rainbow, but if you also emphasize, athletics as a key portion of your self-identity, that also, again, tars you as a lesbian, or I shouldn't say tars, that's a negative word, but associates lesbianism with you in the eyes of most people. Now, one thing that I do as well in my spare time is I participate in roller derby, and that's another instance where the common perception is that if you're a roller derby girl, you're a lesbian. Again, I myself am one, and yes, I would say that there is a higher percentage of queer women participating in roller derby than in the general population, but again, the vast majority of them are actually straight.
It does go to stereotypes. I did musical theater in college, and while I'm not exactly straight, there were plenty of people around me who were. And it comes down to disassociating interests from what makes a person who they are. And we're loaded with stereotypes, and it really should be part of what we want to do here to unravel things like that, so nobody assumes Rainbow Dash must be a lesbian, because only a lesbian would do that.
This, besides tying back to the idea of a woman being able to be anyone, not just feminine or masculine or what have you, just with the characters being girls in different ways, it also relates nicely to the ideas of gender roles and expectations within our society, and how people make assumptions based on personalities that, yes, this person is like this. Like with being tomboyish, people will assume you're a lesbian. That's just not true in our society. One of the things that feminism as a whole likes to work against is the idea that people are constrained by these gender roles and expectations that society puts on them, both men and women. And I think it's really important for us as just a fandom as a whole to recognize that, no, these stereotypes don't hold water. Yes, there are people like that, but making assumptions based on an entire group of people because of something like being tomboyish, just really, at the same time, being offensive to certain people, it's just not true.
Well, on the other end of that spectrum, you have the very high femme characterization of Rarity, who is also a very strong character, despite her characterization as, hating getting dirty, emphasis on pretty things, and what is commonly considered to be girlishness. At the same time, whenever the main six find themselves in an action situation, she's one of the first wading in there with a very physical style of combat. Or at the same time, you have the guile and intelligent way that she dealt, for example, with the Diamond Dogs all the way back in season 1. She shows that you can be both, conventionally. I don't necessarily want to say conventionally, but she proves that you can have a more delicate or, pretty, ladylike, if you will, persona, and yet be strong at your core.
You can embrace the cliche.
Well, and transcend
yes.
it. Transcending it, I think, is the key word there, and I think she does. Looking this season, for example, at Power Ponies, that was a great example of rarity. She was the first of the ponies to really master her powers, and while, again, she tended to do so in a very traditionally rarity way, full of fabulousness and prettiness, she used them to great effect, and with strength and power. I was very impressed with that episode's characterization.
It's a lot like the I can't remember the name of the episode, but when Sweetie Belle and Scootaloo with their real sister and fake sister go camping, and Rarity's like, "Oh, camping? Oh, but I can hang out with my sister," and she goes without without much fight. And then you look at the episode with the Sisterhood Social, the entire episode, Rarity's like, "Oh my god, I hate my sister. I don't want to be dirty. I don't want to do this." But she, lets herself be covered in mud to do the little, race scene and win, because at the end of the day, she knows her family and her sister, which is technically a form of friendship, is more important than, looking pretty or keeping your hooves clean. And at the end of the episode, we get Wet Maid Rarity, playing in the rain or whatever with her sister, because she knows at the end of the day, looking pretty and keeping nice and feminine isn't the most important. It's the relationships with people around you.
And then, of course, finally, I think we're going to want to move on to other topics, but you get to the princesses themselves, particularly Celestia and Luna, who are very strong characters. Again, each has their own flaws, but you look at Celestia; she is very naturally in command, and she exudes grace and strength at the same time. To say nothing of cleverness, mentorship, and even a mischievous nature. Whereas Luna, obviously has her social difficulties, but again, she too is since her reversion to Princess Luna from Nightmare Moon has just been a rock stalwart to the kingdom. And then again, with Princess Cadence, even though she starts out as kind of an adjunct to Shining Armor, and her initial plot line is a conventional marriage, she once again proves to have a combination of strength and sympathy, empathy, and love, which is, of course, her defining characteristic, and even her power.
To sort of go with Luna and Celestia, if you ignore the comics explanations for how Nightmare Moon came to be and only pay attention to the TV shows, Luna went evil, as it were, because of her emotions and her feelings about her sister. And I don't know if any of you panelists have a older or younger sibling. I'm the older sister, I have a younger sister, and I definitely understand what Luna feels like, because at some point, someone's going to be the favorite because it's the baby of the family, or they're doing recitals or whatever, and there is a lot of jealousy, and that can make you act out and just generally be awful, because especially with the viewership of My Little Pony, it's younger kids who don't know necessarily how to handle their emotions, handle their feelings, and with Celestia and Luna, Luna has her jealousy, and she lets that turn her into something she normally wouldn't be. And if it's with real life brothers and sister relationships, one of the siblings might end up being a brat, and they might act out and they might do things to get the attention. It might not be as drastic as turning the entire country into night to make people worship you, like Nightmare Moon did, but it is something that I definitely can relate to, because even though I'm the older sister, my younger sister got a lot of the attention, so I can definitely put myself in Luna's shoes. And that's a really strong sibling relationship that's essentially the center of the conflict of My Little Pony, which is something that you don't see with Rarity and Sweetie Belle or Twilight and Shining Armor or any of the other siblings, because they just, they work out. They don't really ever have a period of hating each other or fighting, but with Luna and Celestia, that's there, and that's pretty good.
That touches on the the general strength of My Little Pony again in writing characters that have believable emotions and relationships. And it really does a lot to improve the complexity of plots and storylines for the characters in girls' media. In boys' media, you do get a lot of high stakes and high emotion, but because of the shallowness of girls' media, a lot of the time, it's a lot harder to tell a story that anyone can really connect with.
I think a lot of it depends on which piece of media you're looking at in general, because Avatar: The Last Airbender was for 12-year-oldish boys. A lot of superhero TV shows is for, 5, 8, 10, 12-year-oldish boys, and they can have very deep writing. But if it's a TV show that has to sell toys, like Transformers, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the Pokemon anime, whatever it is, sometimes the writing will be put to the wayside so they can shove in, the new train set. Which, with ponies, we're very lucky that they were able to handle the train set in various ways and actually have a few train themed episodes and write well, but not all media, whether it be girls media or boys media, have people that care to make a show that works.
It depends on the thought that's put into the toy line as well. A lot of boys' toys are created with stories in mind to encourage that kind of inventive, creative play that Lauren Faust did with her toys when she was young that led to her inspiration with My Little Pony now. A lot of girls' toys exist in the pink ghetto of fashion and not much else. And so it's harder to build storylines around toys like that.
It's kind of interesting what you bring up about girls' toys being kind of relegated to the pink ghetto, because a lot of the people that make decisions about girls' toys lines end up being older white men who honestly really haven't, well, I don't know them personally, but the impression I get is a lot of these people really haven't kind of, I guess, gone out of like the 1950s mindset. Like, this is what they sell, and this is what they've been selling for God knows how long. And it's kind of just this self-reinforcing cycle where people who are very out of date with more modern interpretations of feminism and gender and all that still have essentially control over a lot of the actual marketing and production decisions.
A lot of it has to do with the business end of it. Like, I read an article a week back about the history of the Easy Bake Oven. So the Easy Bake Oven, when it first came out, it was something that you could do that a little girl could replicate what mom used to do in the kitchen. And throughout its very long history, they replicated the styles that was popular in kitchens and the various toys. And now they have a gender-neutral one, which was actually started by a little girl who wrote to Hasbro and said, "My little brother wants an Easy Bake Oven, but he doesn't want a pink one because that's too girly. Boys can bake. When my daddy makes dinner, he uses like a black or silver or white oven. So like, why can't you make a silver oven? So now you can get a pink easy bake oven or a silver easy bake oven, and that's because cooking is a thing everybody can do, and that's because the business people, the marketing people, said, "Oh, everybody can cook. Let's make this for everybody." But when you think of stereotypically girls' toys, people still tend to think that girls like fashion, they like little pink ponies, they like animals, stuffed animals, crafting, pretending to be mom, baby dolls, Barbies. And so a lot of it is the really higher ups in corporations either becoming women or becoming people who are aware of different gender roles. But then that gets into the whole glass ceiling debacle, which is a pretty common thing in feminism, and it's just going to take quite a long time, unfortunately, for that to change.
Mm-hmm.
Girls' toys really have not caught up with the idea that women can do anything these days. I mean, there are still statistical divides across a lot of the world in all realms of existence, but women can and do lead the world and everything below. The toys are not really matching up with the reality, and that's what the pink ghetto is.
Well, actually, it gets even worse than that. Beyond the toy aisle, one instance that was particularly fascinating and very disheartening was there was a show on Cartoon Network as part of their DC animation block called Young Justice that was very critically well received, was much beloved by the fans, but was canceled after 2 seasons. And one of the reasons that was actually issued, well, I should say that came to light and was leaked out to the rest of the world was that they actually felt they were getting too much of a female demographic watching the show. And consequently, they felt that it was not effective enough in the male demographic that they were really aiming for. And that blew a lot of people's minds. You know, here they actually had a show in their traditional superhero milieu that had crossover appeal, and that was treated as a bad thing.
It's really difficult to, I guess, for people who aren't in the content creation world to understand. I went to school for journalism. I'm creating mostly written content, but I understand when you have something that's on TV, you make money from advertisers. And if we all have watched My Little Pony on TV in some way or another, and we're familiar with commercials that air during My Little Pony, and we're familiar with the commercials that would air during a boy show. So if more girls are watching Young Justice than boys, then that means they're going to have to get girl advertisers, and the lucrative boy advertisers are going to pull the plug. So Cartoon Network made the decision that we want to keep that boy advertiser money, so let's can this show that's not drawing in boy advertisers. And it's awful, but at the end of the day, Cartoon Network, which is Time Warner, I believe, they just wanted the money. And I think it's 93% of all people who make media decisions in America are men. So they did it from a money perspective, and that's why a lot of other really good TV shows are gone. Like Motor City was another one that people really like, and that's not doing very well. There's just so many shows, and unfortunately, we would need advertisers to be more progressive or to be accepting that, you know, the girls who watch Young Justice and like it, maybe they want to buy, you know, superhero action figure toys, but then
Well,
they would have, yeah.
That's the crux of it, I think, is that I don't think I think that it really doesn't come from Cartoon Network. It comes from the advertisers who are saying, "Oh, well, wait, if and I don't even think it was a majority of the fandom was female, but just a large enough proportion of it to spook the advertisers, and they didn't think that the female portion of the show's fandom would be receptive to what they were advertising. I can't speak for if that's true or not, but I think that it may very well be. I mean, as you say, they're obviously demonstrating an interest in superhero, based, traditionally male-focused programming. And why wouldn't they then perhaps also feel a desire to buy the toys and actually read the comics and what have you?
It's difficult to escape that the comics industry is probably one of the most problematic entertainment industries in terms of women's issues. It's been an old boys club since time immemorial, and the pages, especially during the 80s and 90s when comics reinvented themselves for new audiences, have really been focused on power fantasies for men, and part of that has been the ability to gain a woman as a spoil of that power.
The whole sort of damsel in distress trope, which, we could go into the whole feminist frequency thing, but that's a whole other day there. I mean, at least with the comics, they're trying to branch into the mainstream. Like, there may or may not be a Wonder Woman movie coming out in the future, but there's probably going to be a Black Widow movie, because at least with Marvel's pushing into all segments with their IPs, and Black Widow was such a good character. She's gonna have a big role in the new Captain America movie, and then she's probably gonna get her own movie. And then you look at Hawkeye, who has nothing. He was deaf in the comics, and they made him hearing in the movies, and I know quite a few deaf people, and they weren't happy about that, but at least Marvel is sort of figuring out in their other stuff girls work. And it's just sort of, I guess, having to trickle backwards into the comics to have people say, hey, this works. Or we just need more female creators, female writers, women, and feminists all up and down the chain.
Well, with My Little Pony, there has at least been a movement away from the pink ghetto, in the sense that Hasbro has at least started licensing companies that are, I think, responsive to all segments of the demographic of the show, such as We Love Fine, Fourth Dimension Entertainment, Funko. There's this recognition that there is a group out there that wants more show accurate toys, that wants to just the
toys seem to strike as more gender neutral.
Exactly. Thank you. That is the point I was trying to get at, and I apologize that my brain froze up there.
It's all right. I mean, they sell them at Target, they sell them at Walmart, they sell them at
Hot Topic,
more adult and orange stores like Hot Topic and Spencer's. But I worked at Toys R Us for Christmas, and we sold a ton of the licensed gender neutral merch, and boys and girls and parents of boys and girls were buying it, and it definitely works.
Well, moving away from that, one topic that we haven't gotten to, and I think is crucial to what we're trying to talk about here, is feminism and the treatment of women within the fandom.
Mm-hmm.
So who wants to take a stab at that first?
Oh, Lordy Lou.
Okay, well, I don't know anything about Bronies against bullshit. I'll definitely go into the whole Pinky Pony thing. So, to TLDR it, a young female fan said, hey, I don't like Down with Molestia because rape jokes. And she tried to get people to be educated about how rape jokes are bad, how Molestia wasn't very conductive to Tumblr, which is where it was hosted, and it's sort of treated like a social network instead of just a blogging platform. And there was a lot of backlash saying, if you don't like it, go away. Rape jokes don't cause rape, etc., and it blew up into this whole ridiculous thing.
There was a lot of upheaval on the Roundtable forums when we tried to open a thread about Down with Molestia. It was very clear from the get-go that people who had not been exposed to the idea of rape culture and feminism in general found it very hard to accept. And it's kind of easy to see why. Um, the core idea of rape culture is that the social background noise in our lives says that rape in many forms is okay. And that implicitly makes people who accept it, who just are minding their own business and absorbing the background of our society, it makes them bad people. And nobody wants to be a bad person.
See, this is actually interesting because no one thinks rape is good. Everyone can agree on that. But the thing is a lot of people don't understand about kind of the cultural and social effects that we have that contribute to rape culture. People who are not tuned into feminism in general, at first grasp, have a hard time accepting the idea of rape culture. It's something that, with proper explanation, is, I don't think, too difficult to grasp, but there's been some very high-profile cases recently that I think work as good examples about this. Getting a little away from the fandom here, but Steubenville is one of the prime examples of this. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that because
I believe you.
I'm terrible with place names. So the entire media sensation around the Steubenville rape trials was not at all focused on these people are rapists. It was, look at these poor young gentlemen who have lost their future. There was just the total lack of sympathy towards the rape victim and the idea that the ones who are really losing out were the rapists who were going to jail because they had a bright future and that was sad or whatever, is just absolutely appalling. But it's a product of our culture and just the social norms that we have that built up this idea of women who get raped bring it on themselves, which is ridiculous. But go ahead.
Oh, there's some recent episodes of Law and Order SVU, which are all up free on Hulu if people want to watch them, that actually cover this. I believe it was the week before this one, which actually had a comedian who may or may not have been Daniel Tosh, who was making fun of a feminist because he's known for telling rape jokes. He's like, wouldn't it be funny if you were gangbangs? Because rape's not funny, but gangbangs are funny. And then the feminist actually gets gangbangs on campus, and the SVU detectives try to go after the comedian for inciting the rape, and it actually has a very good discussion on, does telling rape jokes make people rapists? Because, if I tell a joke about, a rabbi and an Irishman, I'm not going to turn anyone to a rabbi, but it definitely enforces stereotypes, and that's sort of what the show is going after. And the show has other episodes that are heavily based on real life. They've done Steubenville, they've done Hackers, they've done just look up recent episode synopsises on Wikipedia and watch the ones that you're interested in, because it does present both sides very well, because there's always one detective who's like, are you sure? There's no way that's true. But it always ends up taking the more feminist side, and sometimes the rapist goes free in court because the jurors say, oh no, poor him, just like Steubenville, and does present how this is what reality is. It can be rough, it can be harsh, and here's sort of the way of thinking, the way we can fix it.
Well, in the presentation of rape, the rape culture concept, that's where I think feminists run into a lot of difficulties in spreading awareness of that and concern about that to folks that may not already be sold on the concept. Once we get beyond the preaching to the choir, as it were. And I don't have an answer for that, but particularly when you talk about something like Pinky Pony's Down with Molestia movement, there is a sense among those who become defensive about it that that feminists in general become sort of again tarred with a broad brush of being humorless, because unlike I don't know, unlike say rape porn or something like that, the perception among them is that the Princess Molestia comic was kind of a light-hearted sex romp of the sort that you would easily see in I don't know, the 60s or 70s in film, which again just causes an internal backlash in the minds of people who are then being presented with the case that no, this is furthering rape culture and should be expunged from the internet.
It's always hard for people to accept they're doing something wrong, even though it's not their fault. I'm sure we all know somebody who's unintentionally racist because that's how they were raised. Sort of looking at it as a famous example, Paula Deen. Paula Deen just acted how she grew up. She's 70 and she's from the South. She's from a much different time. And she could have said, okay, I'm going to learn from this. But she chose not to. And there are people in this fandom, in everything in real life, can say, oh, rape culture, I'm going to learn from this, and I'm going to choose to be a better person so I won't hurt people in the future. But sometimes it's hard to say, I'm doing something wrong, even though it's not my fault. Sometimes it's hard to say, even though I like this comic, I have to stop supporting it because I know this is harmful in some way. And I know it can be very difficult to be a selfless person, but I think sometimes it has to do with people being willing to admit they're doing something wrong, intentionally or no.
Does anyone else have any comment on that?
Do we want to talk at all about the free speech side of the counter argument, or?
Well, I do think there is a counter argument to be made there, and I think that it's an instance where.
Well, let's introduce it properly. That was just
okay.
Conversational.
Yeah, please do.
Yes, so in America, the First Amendment covers the right to free speech, religion, etc., etc. Of course, there's many asterisks involved, but generally you can make a rape joke and it's legal. The issue with Down with Molestia is that the comic was posted on Tumblr, which is a community that has a terms of service. And if something makes people uncomfortable because you're making fun of them or whatnot, the Tumblr mods can choose to get rid of it. And there was a lot of people who were very vicious on both sides of Down with Molestia who were trying to get each other blocked and banned. And I believe Down with Molestia got taken down because Hasbro found out. And then that's a whole C&D issue, which again fits with Tumblr's terms of service. So technically, yeah.
Well, okay. Even outside of the idea of the terms of service argument, which is a whole nother bag, just the idea that free speech, yes, is a guaranteed right, but one should recognize that there should be limitations to your speech. Yes, you are free to do this. You are free to produce rape jokes. However, the ideal goal here should be that people should recognize that, yes, these can be harmful both to individuals and in terms of like a cultural level. But just rather than trying to essentially play into the idea of censorship, which is going through the, like, in this case, rather than talking about government censorship, I'm just talking about going through like the terms of services and trying to get something taken down specifically because you think it's not right. It doesn't actually really tend to address the problems that are inherent with it, because no one is going to take anything away from that it's just going to create people who are hostile to the idea of feminism, and they're never going to come to terms with why this is a bad thing. So even
Right.
if... Sorry.
Oh,
Go ahead.
so taking it as an educational opportunity and approaching that education with a softer hand, perhaps, can often be, I think, more conducive to bringing people around to, to the more feminist way of thinking.
I guess the question is, how do you offer to educate someone without coming off as condescending? Because in the Tumblr social justice warrior community, if someone says, "I'm sorry for being sexist or whatever, could you tell me what I'm doing wrong?" And then they always yell back, "Google it yourself. It's not my job to teach you." But we can't expect people, especially with fandoms, closed community, sort of closed off communities, to educate themselves if nobody says, "Hey, here's how to do that." So I guess the question is, how do we, as My Little Pony fans, prevent, giant cluster clucks like this from happening in the future? How do we educate people about this?
Well, one of the core problems to engineer around is exactly how the free speech counter-argument was constructed. It wasn't really about freedom of expression because they were trying to shut up the people who were asking them to stop making rape jokes. It wasn't exactly consistent. What they really wanted was freedom from the consequences of making rape jokes, which is a different thing.
Yeah.
And it goes, I think, to a more fundamental issue of cooperation in terms of what we actually have to get around to solve the problem.
And I think that actually goes more broadly than just the rape culture topic. Again, once people have it in their heads that someone is a is a social justice warrior, humorless, dour, intolerant, inflexible, they get into that bunker mentality. They're just going to be that much harder to reach, especially if the folks who are trying to put forward the feminist perspective are doing so from a position of ultimate moral certitude. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I.e., I know right, I know what's best, you're wrong, you're being a jerk, and and you don't understand, you'll never understand, you're a privileged white adolescent male, so blah.
Well, speaking as a privileged white male, I think the core issue is about respect, above all, and especially when problems are first brought up. The the reaction that many have to hearing about rape culture is no, that can't be, and it's expressed as disbelief. But those words and that idea, no, it can't be, are so easily turned on the person bearing the message, and it shows a lack of respect because a person has come to you to tell you that there's a problem that is making them uncomfortable. And the respectful thing to do in that situation is to say, tell me about it. Let me see if there's something we can do to help. And just changing the initial reaction to that would be an incredible victory. It would get so many, feet in the doors.
So then, going in a more broad direction, how there's the talk about the topic of male appropriation of the traditionally female space that would normally accompany a show like My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic.
I guess this is a short story time. I went to see the Equestria Girls movie in theaters, and it was like probably the one theater within a 1 hour radius that was showing this. and there was one mom and her female friends or, partner, whatever. And they had two girls with them. And one girl had her Rainbow Dash plushie and had like a We Love Fine shirt, and the other girl was wearing a dress, and they were all cute and stuff. And we sat behind them in the movie theater, and every other person in the movie theater were bronies, stereotypical ages and whatnot. And before the show started, a woman stood up and said, "Hey, I'm going to be at BronyCon. I'm going to be selling stuff." And she was talking about engraved lighters and Ruby mouse pads and just stereotypical things boys would buy brony merchandise. And I was there with my dad, who's, in his 50s, and he's just shaking his head. And after the show, we were sitting in the car, and I'm like, those mouse pads you were showing, that woman was trying to sell are like boobs and ass mouse pads, right? And he's like, and there was, a family with kids right in front of them. And that's just sort of what I've seen in the toy aisle in areas where it's supposed to be for kids, even at comic conventions, which have nothing to do with My Little Pony. Pony fans, especially the older male fans, show up and try to, I guess, sort of appropriate it and make it about them. Because, you would think a showing in the middle of the day is the perfect time for a mom to take her kids to watch My Little Pony in theaters. And even then, it's not really a safe space for the kids because the fans couldn't be respectful and not try to sell boob mouse pads.
I have to say that I've had a somewhat different experience of the local bronies here in San Francisco. Now, granted, this is San Francisco, and we're sort of in a bubble here that is, I think, more attuned to feminist issues, queer issues, and even if folks don't self-identify that way, there is just a more cosmopolitan attitude toward it. And when I also went to see the Equestria Girls movie, there were many, many male bronies there. And by the way, I do identify as a brony. I like to think of that as a unisex term, and I also like to think that the majority of bronies are well-intentioned. And I really hate to see a whole fandom ruined in public perception by the loud minority that cast a poor light on it. So that said, whenever I've been at a brony meetup, or like when we went to see Equestria Girls, there was always a lot of concern about, okay, folks, parents are bringing their children to this. We need to be polite, respectful, and just not show ourselves in a bad light. Mm-hmm. So those thoughts are out there. They just maybe, need to find a different message. Well, I shouldn't say different message, a different vector for the message, and that is other bronies that, look like them, that, that are also the usual, again, generally adolescent or young adult male fandom, and who are therefore not coming across as the other, but still putting forth that message as an ally. I think that can be some of the most valuable messaging that we can get. I mean, what do you guys have? What are your thoughts on that?
I have to wonder, during the height of DWM, it sometimes seemed like most of the broad brony communities were kind of rallied around resisting the message of DWM. And maybe not for the Molestia blog, or maybe not for rape jokes in general, but definitely seeing themselves as wanting more, we don't want to have anything to do with this. You're the ones putting this in our face. We'd like to move on, please. And I wonder if some bridges haven't been burned already. That worries me.
Well, I don't know about burned. Perhaps for certain people, like I don't think that that Pinky Pony is going to have a lot of traction with folks anytime soon, because as the initiator of the Down with Molestia campaign, and that's unfortunate because she does have a lot of valuable things to say. And again, she did cause that. Again, I don't want to make it sound like, oh, she, made this happen, but because of the way she presented her message, she did again push folks into a reactionary mode, and that can be very damaging to further attempts to educate them with perhaps a lighter hand. And that's not to minimize at all her issues with the original Ask Princess Molestia comic. Now, I'm perhaps going to be a bit controversial within this group and say that I actually enjoyed the comic. I didn't find much offensive about it, but I could see very easily where it would be triggering for some. Just because I personally take a more sex positive view of feminism at large, more of a sort of in the mold of a Susie Bright, for example.
Well, just to counter that, I also consider myself sex positive in general and in my feminism, and I did not like it one bit.
Well, and there you go. There can be
doesn't necessarily mean you're going to enjoy molestia, because many of the sex positive people that I know who had problems with molestia originated from facts like lack of consent, but that just molestia was not hidden behind like a click wall or anything, came up in search engines, was incredibly prevalent in media, and bronies in general don't do a great job of hiding not safe for work content. Just it's very frequently intermingled with safe for work content, which is one of the primary problems.
I could not agree with that more. That is a huge, huge problem.
This is something that I've spoken to with a couple furries about, because most of the furry explicit content is behind fur affinity, ink bunny, whatever, behind a very strict wall. So I remember accidentally coming across furry stuff in 6th grade, but it was completely safe for work, and I didn't even know what furries were. And it took me a long time to learn about furries and that they did not safe for work stuff. And by that time, I was smart enough to not have Google Safe Search on, and I knew what I was getting into. But a lot of the times I see people say, well, what are you doing when your kids Google unsupervised? And that's sort of true in the home. You have to teach your kids how to be safe. But hour or so after the It Ain't Easy Being Breezy episode came out, the second result for that episode search on YouTube, the thumbnail, which is explicitly chosen by the uploader, was breezy porn, which is completely against YouTube's terms of service and was something someone explicitly did knowing people of all ages would find it. And that's, again, has to go with respect, because you could choose to put it on, Derpy Guru and put the not safe for work stuff. Tumblr's getting really good with its not safe for work result stuff. There's things you can do, but people say, well, those kids shouldn't be Googling on their own, even if they're, at the library, at church, at school, at a friend's house. Kids are going to do it. And there's the question of whether or not it's safe for kids to learn about sex at earlier ages. But it's something that has to do with the whole respect thing. You're not respecting kids seeing, Pinkie Pie cut up Rainbow Dash and turning her into cupcakes. That's something, nobody wants to stumble upon, and that's something no parent wants to explain to their kids.
I think that's the message that needs to get across, though, is that it is about respect. The less we paint it as a rape culture thing and don't use the charged terminology, I think the better time we're going to have reaching folks who might otherwise be turned off or unsympathetic. And that, I think, is the most important thing. Once we can get a foot in the door, the thin end of the wedge, and we can start them accepting the basic premises of feminism. Over time, we can get to those more charged issues to somebody who now has a more open mentality, as opposed to just diving straight in, feet first, clubbing somebody over the head.
My frustration is I understand that some of the terminology of feminism is perceived as charged. However, whenever I say the rape culture, whenever I say rape culture, I'm not using it in an accusatory term or anything like that. I'm just using it as a word to define something. It's frustrating to me that it's perceived as a charged word because it's really just a definition. It's just saying a simplification of, yes, all of the social and cultural effects that makes rape perceived as and treated as less of an issue than something like murder.
Unfortunately, that just happens in language. Much like our
know.
euphemisms tend to need to reinvent themselves, words with negative connotations can as well become as negative as the things they were originally replacing.
Well, and that's a place where I think we've been ill-served by some of the more doctrinaire, social justice warrior types, particularly folks out on Tumblr, for example, who are using it as a cudgel, and that's going to affect the rest of us whether we like it or not. And so then it just becomes a question of how do we find a new frame that's going to be more effective for us, and for that matter, how do we approach? And this is a problematic issue. How do we approach those social justice warriors and say, guys, you're not helping?
The thing is I've tried to have discussions with them. I've had some friends who were social justice warriors, and I've lost the friendship because a lot of the times it's just being part of a crowd or just defending your own bad behavior. And I have a friend who's deaf and he's autistic and he has all these various reasons to be, oppressed, but at the end of the day, he's still white and he's still a guy. And because of that, people said, oh, you can never know what it's like to feel bad. You can never know what it's like to be oppressed because you're white and a guy. And social justice warriors, I think, need to accept that it's not about me versus you. There's no such thing as the oppression Olympics. Just because in America a woman might not make as much as a man, it doesn't mean that our struggles are any more or less important on a global scale as, genital mutilation or bride burning or any of these other really, really nasty things. And you need to be aware of not just the problems you have, but the problems everybody in the world suffers and how you can take steps to fix that.
Absolutely. I couldn't have put it better myself. When you start comparing your issues to somebody else's issues and saying, well, obviously mine are so much worse than yours, that again creates the defensive mentality, the reactive mentality. Whereas, saying that our respective struggles are different, and here's one difference, and genital mutilation is a great example, that's the kind of thing where you can say, listen, how, you'd feel pretty angry if there was a culture out there where, say, women were in charge and they were, cutting off boys' penises.
So, sorry, something I wanted to mention was this kind of ties into the idea of intersectionality, and just oppression should not be a competition. I agree. And I recognize that individuals are not going to be as well versed on issues that do not affect them. But whenever we get into a pissing contest about who is more or less oppressed, It's just not helpful. And my problem is, I don't think this is something. I think this is a personality issue, because people who are going to be like that, who are actually going to go out of their way to say, yes, I have it worse than you, or something, besides not being helpful, I'm not sure it's something you'll honestly be able to communicate to people if they have that kind of mindset, because they're obviously already people who are aware of a lot of the issues surrounding stuff like feminism or queer theory, yada yada.
For me, I look more towards the future and just sort of how technology is changing things. And as we communicate with each other more and more frequently and share more of our lives, I guess we should all sort of realize, how can I do something to help people, or at least in the minimum, how can I do something not to hurt people, and just sort of keep that in mind, because you might make a decision that you might think is good for your friends, but it might hurt someone else down the road. And a lot of about feminism is equality for everybody. Doesn't matter who or what or where they are. It's just trying to achieve that equality. And I think that what we're looking forward to in the future, like politically, socially, technologically, we can definitely move closer to the dream of equality for all.
Well, I'll jump in and say that I think that folks who are out there trying to educate have a very hard task. And the hardest part of that task is not giving in to the anger and the frustration of change being so gradual, so 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and doing your very best to stay level-headed and to keep as much of a positive, inclusive spin on things as you can, so as not to alienate the people that you're trying to persuade. Persuasion is always about identifying with the person you're trying to educate and giving them a reason to identify with you. And if we can do that more often, and particularly within the Brony fandom and in larger sort of geek and fandom communities as well, where I think similar problems do exist. Just the Brony fandom is young and full of the proverbial piss and vinegar, as it were. So I think we have maybe a harder row to hoe there. But the more we can be a good example of our own philosophies, as opposed to somebody using them as a way to prove our own superiority or let out our own issues, the more we can do that, the better chance we're going to have to make the progress that needs to be made.
If I were to want one thing, one big change, one takeaway from all this, it would be that everyone should support their fellow fan. We do that a lot already in this fandom. When somebody is a great artist or they make great music, we really rally around them and help them create and revel in our enjoyment together. But when it's really critical to rally around people is when there's a problem. When they say there's something wrong here. Just that basic presumption of, okay, I hear you, keep talking, can be very powerful. It doesn't mean that you have to assume they're right. It doesn't mean that you have to concede your ground at the first word. But it does mean don't shut down the conversation before it begins. Don't shut someone out from the community just because they're different, because the entire message of the show and the whole reason we rallied around it is that we're all different and we work well together. And that's all I want.
One word I would like to say going forward is kind of touching on the persuasiveness topic you were bringing up, is being someone who's actively working for change, whether it's within a small community or within the world at large, is a task that can be frustrating and disheartening, and just it can wear you out very easily. However, if you let that get to you, if you let that kind of influence the way that you actually discuss with people, the way you essentially work with the world, then going forward you'll have problems. Just unfortunately, whether whether I like it or not, one of the best ways to actually be persuasive and convince people as to yes, there is a problem is to remain level-headed and calm. And if you are reaching the point where you're actually getting angry, step back, just bow out if you have to, because no matter how angry you get about a subject, it just won't be helpful to actually express that anger. I know how frustrating it can be to not be able to vent. I know how nice it is, that cathartic feeling that just lashing out at someone gives, but you can't do it. If you're trying to persuade people, you have to be the one who stays calm, regardless of the situation, and it's shit, but it is what it is.
I'm sorry, I know this is closing statements, but I feel that there's a valuable thing to jump in and say here, and that is that we also have to be willing to forgive people their lapses while we're helping them improve and grow. They're not going to be perfect overnight. And there's a gentle way to nudge them and say, you know, I know you're working on this, I appreciate that, but that thing you just said or that thing you just did, that's the kind of thing you need to watch out for.
You're not a bad person, but you just did a really good impression of one.
Exactly. You're not a bad person, but that was not so much a good thing just there.
And it all comes down to respect. You gotta respect the person who you're trying to help, because screaming and calling them a shitlord that should kill themselves, which is something some people love to do, that doesn't help anything.
And that's all we have for tonight. Thank you for listening to our Feminists in the Fandom podcast. I hope you have a great tomorrow.